Rogan had been traveling alone to oversee the progress on his family's new home in a distant state. For convenience, he booked a room at a dingy Motel 6 located in a questionable part of town. The room he was assigned was at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway on the top floor. On his last night, he was jolted awake by the shrill ring of the telephone beside his bed. A voice on the other end, claiming to be from the front desk, warned him about recent break-ins, advising him to lock his door. Groggily thanking the caller, Rogan noticed something chilling. The door to his room was slightly ajar. Tension gripped Rogan as he tiptoed to check the door. He peered into the hallway, his breath hitching as he spotted something unusual. His shaving kit was perched on the windowsill outside his room. Quickly retrieving it, he secured the door and paced around his room, inspecting every corner. The eerie silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the old air conditioner. Deciding to report the strange incident, he called the front desk. However, the clerk denied any knowledge of the earlier call or reports of break-ins, leaving Rogan unnerved and confused. The next morning, Rogan couldn't shake off the unease. He recounted the events to his wife over the phone, but her reassurances did little to settle his nerves. As he packed his things, something caught his attention in the bathroom mirror. Standing behind him was a ghostly figure of a woman, her pale face streaked with blood, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. Before Rogan could react, she vanished into thin air, leaving him shaken to his core. He left the motel in a hurry, vowing never to return. 2 years prior, the woman who haunted Rogan's room had been a victim of a gruesome crime. Kidnapped from a neighboring town, she was brought to the very room Rogan had occupied. Her captor kept her imprisoned for days, subjecting her to unspeakable horrors. On her final night, she managed to call the front desk for help, but no one answered her desperate plea. The next morning, her lifeless body was found in the room, her spirit left to wander, seeking justice or solace. The staff at the motel rarely discussed the murder, brushing off the occasional complaints of guests about odd occurrences in the room. Rumors of a ringing phone with no caller and shadows flitting across mirrors circulated, but were dismissed as urban legends. Yet, for the woman's restless spirit, the phone was her lifeline to the world of the living. Each time a new tenant occupied the room, she tried to reach out, hoping for someone to hear her. When Rogan returned home, he shared his haunting experience with his family. They listened intently, a mixture of skepticism and concern etched on their faces. His teenage daughter, intrigued, began researching the motel and stumbled upon old news articles about the murder. As she delved deeper, she found chilling similarities between her father's story and the reported sightings of the ghost. Rogan's wife, alarmed, urged him to forget about it, but the incident lingered in their minds. Months later, a group of friends checked into the same room, drawn by the morbid tales surrounding it. Patrick, Dog, Lindsay, Macy, and Rick were amateur ghost hunters, always on the lookout for their next thrill. Ignoring the warnings of the motel staff, they set up their equipment and prepared for a night of paranormal investigation. Little did they know, the spirit of the murdered woman was all too real. As midnight approached, the group decided to play the Spirit of the Glass game, hoping to summon the ghost. Their laughter and jokes faded as the glass began to move on its own, spelling out chilling messages. "Help me," it wrote, over and over. Suddenly, the telephone rang, startling everyone. Patrick answered, his face draining of color as he heard faint whispers on the other end. The room grew icy cold, and the lights flickered ominously. Shadows danced across the walls, and an anguished scream echoed from the bathroom. The group huddled together, terrified as the ghostly figure of the murdered woman appeared before them. Her presence was overwhelming, her sorrow palpable. "Why didn't you answer?" she whispered before vanishing. The friends fled the motel in the dead of night, but the nightmare was far from over. The ghost began haunting each of them, appearing in mirrors, ringing phones at odd hours, and leaving cryptic messages. One by one, they were driven to the brink of madness, realizing too late the danger of disturbing a restless spirit. Hearing about the group's plight, Rogan felt compelled to return to the motel and confront the ghost. This time, he came prepared, bringing along a psychic medium who specialized in helping spirits move on. Together, they entered the cursed room, hoping to uncover the truth and put the ghost to rest. The medium, a woman named Evelyn, stepped into the room and immediately sensed the heavy presence of the spirit. She described the overwhelming pain and fear emanating from the ghost, recounting flashes of the woman's final moments. Evelyn revealed that the ghost lingered not out of vengeance, but because her plea for help had gone unanswered. Rogan listened intently, guilt gnawing at him for being unable to help. Evelyn suggested holding a seance to communicate with the spirit and uncover what she needed to find peace. As night fell, Evelyn set up candles and protective charms around the room. Rogan joined her at the table, where they began the seance. The air grew cold, and the candle flames flickered violently. Slowly, the spirit manifested, her translucent figure glowing faintly in the dim light. Evelyn spoke gently, asking the spirit to share her story. The ghost's voice was faint but filled with sorrow as she recounted the horrifying events that led to her death. Through the seance, the spirit revealed her name, Laura, and begged Rogan and Evelyn to help her find peace. She spoke of the man who had taken her life and the phone call that could have saved her. Rogan felt a deep pang of regret, realizing the significance of the unanswered call. Laura's final plea was clear. She needed her story to be known, and her murderer to be brought to justice. Her anguish turned to desperation as she begged them not to abandon her. Evelyn suggested they investigate Laura's murder further, convinced that uncovering the identity of her killer was the key to setting her free. Rogan agreed and spent the next few days poring over old police reports and news articles. He uncovered a crucial detail. A man named Victor Hansen, a known criminal, had been arrested near the motel shortly after Laura's murder, but had been released due to lack of evidence. Rogan realized Victor might still be alive and possibly dangerous. Rogan and Evelyn began tracking Victor, following a trail of rumors and reports of his whereabouts. Their search led them to a small, rundown town a few hours away. They found Victor living a reclusive life, avoiding public attention. Rogan was torn between confronting him directly and gathering enough evidence to bring him to justice. Evelyn urged caution, reminding him that the spirit's peace depended on doing things the right way. Rogan and Evelyn decided to confront Victor in a local bar where he was known to frequent. Pretending to be casual acquaintances, they struck up a conversation, steering it toward the events of the past. Victor's demeanor shifted when Laura's name was mentioned, his face clouding with guilt and anger. Rogan, barely able to contain his fury, demanded answers. Victor, cornered, admitted to kidnapping Laura but denied killing her, claiming someone else was responsible. Victor's revelation turned the investigation on its head. He provided details that led Rogan and Evelyn back to the motel, where they uncovered a hidden journal belonging to the motel's previous manager. The entries revealed that the manager had discovered Laura's body, but covered it up to avoid tarnishing the motel's reputation. The journal also hinted that the manager might have been complicit in the crime. Rogan realized Laura's murderer had been closer than anyone had imagined. With the journal in hand, Rogan and Evelyn went to the police, who reopened the case. The former manager, now an elderly man living in seclusion, was arrested after forensic evidence linked him to Laura's death. As the news broke, the story of Laura's tragic fate spread, finally giving her the recognition she had long sought. Rogan returned to the motel one last time, feeling a sense of closure, but also a lingering sadness for all Laura had endured. Rogan and Evelyn conducted a final ritual in the motel room, inviting Laura's spirit to move on. This time, the room felt lighter, the oppressive weight lifting as Laura's figure appeared one last time. She smiled faintly, her expression one of gratitude and relief, before fading away into the light. Rogan left the motel with a renewed sense of purpose, vowing to It began like any other night, with Silas falling into a restless sleep. At 2:30 a.m., his cell phone buzzed violently, its glow casting eerie shadows on the walls. Half asleep, he squinted at the screen, noting the unknown number before answering. "Hello?" he murmured groggily. At first there was only static, but then came the faintest sound, like a whisper laced with screams. Silas hung up, heart pounding, trying to dismiss it as a prank. The calls came again the next night and the night after, always at 2:30 a.m. Each time the static grew louder, and the whispers turned into incoherent, guttural murmurs. Shadows began shifting in his room, flickering as if responding to the sound. Silas stopped answering the calls, but his phone would ring until he unplugged it. Sleep was a fleeting luxury, replaced by dread. Desperate, Silas changed his number, hoping to end the torment. For 3 blissful nights, there was silence, but on the 4th night, the buzzing returned at the same hour. "How?" he whispered, staring at the screen. The same unknown number appeared, and this time, a childlike giggle echoed through the phone. The sound of faint footsteps followed as though someone was pacing near him. Silas called the number back, but it didn't ring. Instead, a recorded voice said, "This number is no longer in service." His confusion deepened when his door creaked open on its own, revealing an empty hallway. "Is someone there?" he called out, his voice shaking. The reply came from the phone in his hand, a faint whisper of his own name, Silas. One night, as Silas ignored another call, he noticed movement in the corner of his room. A shadow darker than the night seemed to writhe and grow, its shape shifting unnaturally. He froze, clutching the phone as it buzzed in his palm. The shadow vanished as abruptly as it had appeared, leaving Silas drenched in cold sweat. The phone stopped ringing, but the silence felt more oppressive. Hoping for a solution, Silas played the voicemail the unknown number had left. Static filled the air, followed by faint whispers that grew louder. They weren't just random sounds, they formed words. "Don't run. Stay. Watch." Terrified, Silas deleted the message, but his phone buzzed again. This time, there was no number, only the word "now" displayed on the screen. Even without his phone ringing, Silas couldn't escape the whispers. They seemed to seep from the walls, growing louder in the dead of night. His mirror fogged up unnaturally, as though something invisible was breathing heavily. When he wiped it clean, the words "Answer me" appeared in jagged letters, written as though from the inside. He stumbled back, his chest heaving with fear. Unable to endure it alone, Silas confided in his best friend, Liam. Liam stayed over, determined to witness the calls for himself. At 2:30 a.m., the phone buzzed, and Liam urged Silas to answer it on speaker. A voice, both childlike and sinister, whispered, "You can't escape." Liam's face turned pale as he grabbed the phone, but it immediately powered off in his hands. Doors throughout Silas's house began opening without reason. His bedroom door creaked open repeatedly, despite him locking it. Once, he woke up to find every cabinet and drawer in the kitchen wide open. Liam refused to spend another night in the house, leaving Silas alone again. The loneliness amplified the haunting. One night, Silas dreamed of an old rotary phone ringing endlessly in a darkened room. He approached it, trembling, and lifted the receiver. "Let me in," the voice on the line rasped. He woke with a start, his own phone vibrating violently beside him. The unknown number flashed on the screen once more. Silas searched the unknown number online, finding nothing. However, an old blog post mentioned a string of strange calls linked to the same number years ago. The writer claimed to have been haunted by the calls until they destroyed the phone. Silas hesitated, clutching his phone tightly. Destroying it seemed too final. One stormy night, Silas awoke to find his bedroom window wide open. Rain soaked the carpet, and the curtains billowed unnaturally. He rushed to close it, but as he did, he felt icy fingers brush against his wrist. A guttural laugh echoed from his phone lying on the bed. It wasn't ringing, but the sound came from it. Silas began feeling watched at all hours. Shadows flitted in his peripheral vision, but nothing was ever there. One night, he caught a faint reflection of a figure standing behind him in his mirror. When he turned, the room was empty. His phone buzzed once, lighting up the darkness like a sinister beacon. Unable to sleep or think clearly, Silas smashed his phone with a hammer. For a few nights, peace returned, but then, the landline began to ring. Silas hesitated before answering, his heart racing. Static filled the line, followed by the familiar whisper, "You can't destroy me." Even when Silas unplugged the landline, the whispers continued, this time coming from the TV. Late one night, the static-filled screen displayed a shadowy figure. Its head tilted unnaturally as it whispered, "I'm coming." Silas unplugged the TV, but the whispers lingered in the air. Desperate, Silas sought help from a local medium. She claimed the entity attached to him was feeding on his fear. "It wants something from you," she warned. But when she tried to cleanse his home, she screamed and fled, refusing to return. Silas was truly alone. A final voicemail arrived. "One last chance. Let me in." Silas ignored it, but the doors in his house all slammed shut simultaneously. The air turned icy, and faint whispers surrounded him. He felt trapped, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Silas researched a banishment ritual online, gathering candles and salt. As he performed it, the whispers grew deafening. Shadows danced around the room mocking him. The phone vibrated violently, even though it was disconnected. "Stop," the voice growled, shaking the entire house. The entity finally revealed itself, a shadowy figure with glowing eyes standing in his doorway. "You ignored me," it hissed. Silas screamed as it lunged toward him, but the ritual's circle held. The figure dissolved into smoke, leaving the house eerily silent. The calls stopped, and Silas finally found peace. But the events left an indelible mark on him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something lingered in the shadows. Late at night, when his new phone buzzes, he hesitates to answer. Some wounds never fully heal. When I was in 8th grade, I embarked on a school trip called the Louisiana Tour. It was an exciting journey, promising visits to significant historical and cultural sites across southern Louisiana. Among the stops was Corn Plantation, reputed to be one of the most haunted locations in the country. Stories about the plantation were numerous, each more unsettling than the last. Little did I know, this stop would mark the beginning of a chilling experience I would never forget. As we stood in a dimly lit room with a larger group, the tour guide began narrating tales of the plantation's history. My focus wavered as I heard an odd, distinct sound, a single piano key being struck, sharp and deliberate. At first, I thought it was part of the ambiance, a trick to enhance the ghost stories. But when I glanced around, there was no piano in sight, and the sound continued intermittently. I whispered to my friends, asking if they heard the piano notes. They looked at me like I was imagining things, shaking their heads. Frustrated and uneasy, I kept scanning the room. That's when I noticed a woman in the group staring at me. She pointed to her ear and then to me, her face mirroring my confusion. She had heard it too. The tour guide's voice grew somber as he recounted the tale of a Confederate soldier who once lived at the plantation. According to legend, he was an accomplished pianist who met a tragic end in that very room. Guests often reported hearing him play his piano in the dead of night, a melody from beyond the grave. A chill crept down my spine as the guide's words confirmed my fears. After the tour, I approached the woman who had also heard the sound. Her husband and son, however, claimed they had heard nothing. It was clear as day, she insisted. We exchanged uneasy glances, and I felt an inexplicable sense of dread as we walked out of the room. It felt as though something unseen was watching us. As the day went on, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling. The bus ride back to the hotel should have been relaxing, but the memory of the piano keys haunted me. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long across the landscape, and every noise felt amplified. Even my friends noticed my unease, though they dismissed it as overactive imagination. That night, I struggled to fall asleep. When I finally did, my dreams were filled with fragmented images of the plantation, the soldier, and that piano. I woke up in a cold sweat, convinced I heard faint music in the distance. The hotel room was silent, but the unease remained, wrapping around me like a heavy cloak. The next day, the group continued our tour. But I felt a constant sense of being watched. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia, but then I started noticing shadows that didn't match the objects around me. The feeling intensified when I caught fleeting glimpses of a figure in a Confederate uniform out of the corner of my eye. During one of our stops, I felt an icy touch on my shoulder. Whipping around, I found no one there. My heart raced as I realized the invisible entity from Corn Plantation might have followed me. I didn't dare tell anyone. They'd think I was losing my mind. As the trip neared its end, I received a cryptic note slipped under my hotel room door. Written in elegant, old-fashioned handwriting, it read, "Leave well enough alone." My blood ran cold. Was it a prank? Or was the ghost trying to warn me? On the bus ride back home, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. But the dread followed me, a dark cloud hanging over my every thought. Even the usually comforting chatter of my friends couldn't lift my spirits. When I finally arrived home, I hoped the nightmare would end. But the atmosphere in my room felt off, as if the air itself had thickened. That night, the piano sound returned, louder and clearer than ever. I buried my head under the covers, praying for it to stop. Days passed, and the haunting escalated. One night, I woke to find the figure of a Confederate soldier standing at the foot of my bed. His face was pale and expressionless, his eyes empty. I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear as he raised a ghostly hand and pointed at me. Desperate, I confided in my grandmother. who had always been deeply spiritual. She listened intently, her face grave. "You've brought something back with you," she said. She insisted on performing a cleansing ritual to rid the house of the spirit. During the ritual, strange things happened. The candles flickered violently, and cold gusts of air swept through the room. My grandmother chanted prayers, her voice steady despite the chaos. Finally, the air seemed to lighten, and the oppressive presence lifted, for the moment. For a few weeks, things seemed to return to normal. I began to relax, convincing myself that the haunting was over. But deep down, I knew it wasn't gone for good. The ghost had attached itself to me, and it wasn't ready to let go. One night, the ghost returned, more menacing than ever. This time, it spoke. "Why did you listen?" it hissed, its voice like wind through dead leaves. I mustered all my courage and replied, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." The ghost's expression softened, and it began to fade. After that night, the hauntings stopped. I realized the ghost wasn't malicious. It was a lost soul searching for peace. The experience left me with a newfound respect for the unknown and a cautionary tale to share. Years later, I decided to share my story. Each retelling brought back the fear and wonder of that 8th grade trip. I hope my experience would remind others to tread lightly in places with histories as dark as corn plantation. Even now, I occasionally hear the faint sound of a piano key in the quiet of the night. Whether it's a trick of the mind or a lingering echo of the ghost, I'll never know. But one thing is certain, some stories stay with you forever, haunting the edges of your memories like shadows that never fade.